asymmetric defense versus what they're going to be. It's not going to just be a Deus Ex Machina.
I think that's a great point to end on, Jason, because there's other stuff we want to talk about. So one of the things that, Balaji's commented on that I give him, a tremendous amount of credit for is is the idea of corporate journalism. In fact, Balaji, you're the first person I heard that term from, corporate journalism, which is a recognition that all of these reporters actually are employees of companies, and they have a company culture, and they have owners. The companies do. Those owners often have an agenda. There's often a dogma inside these corporations. And it really got me to see journalism in a new light, because these journalists portray themselves as the high priests of the truth, who are there to speak truth to power. And actually, they're really just kind of the lowest paid functionaries on the corporate totem pole. And in contradistinction to what you've called citizen journalists, who are people who are writing what they see as the truth in blogs or formats like this, where they are not getting paid for it. We're doing it because we want to put forward what we know to be the truth. And actually, I'd love to hear you speak to that, because I think this is like one of the most powerful ideas that I've heard you put forward.
Sure. So much I can say about this. The first thing I would do is I'd recommend a book that recently came out by Ashley Rinsberg called The Gray Lady Winked. And the reason it's very important, and I'd put it up there, frankly, with top 5 books I'd recommend. I know I've recommended other books. Top 5 books I'd recommend, Gray Lady Winked. It goes back through the archives. The New York Times calls themselves the paper of record. They call themselves, the first draft of history. They've literally run billboards calling themselves the truth. But it's just owned by some random family in New York. And, this guy, Arthur Sulzberger, who inherited it from his father's father's father. And so you have this random rich white guy in New York who literally tries to determine what is true for the entire world. His employees write something down. We're supposed to believe that this is true. And I simply just don't believe that model is operative anymore, because I think truth is mathematical truth. It's cryptographic truth. It's truth that one can check for oneself rather than, argument from authority. It's argument from cryptography. And, one of the things with Bitcoin, with cryptocurrencies, is given decentralized way of checking on that. Now, to the point about corporate media, they're literally corporations. These are publicly traded companies with financial statements and quarterly, reports and goals and revenue targets. And so once you kind of are on the inside of one of these operations, you realize that hit piece or what have you is being graded in a spreadsheet for how many likes and RTs it gets on Twitter. And if it gets more, they're going to do more pieces like that, flood the zone with that. And if it doesn't, then they're going to do less. And they're all conscious of this. For example, Nicholas Kristof wrote an article. I think it's the articles no one reads, or articles someone will read, where he noticed that his Trump columns get something like 5x more views than his other columns. It's like this huge ratio. And so at least some folks there are privy to their page views. So, and of course, they're looking at their Twitter likes and RTs, even if those are not directly page views. They're certainly correlated with the page views on the article. So all these folks are literally employees of for-profit corporations that are trying to maximize their profits. But we believe them when they market themselves as the truth, like the NYT, or as democracy itself, like the Washington Post, or fair and balanced, like Fox. These people equate themselves with truth, democracy, and fairness. They weren't exactly around at the founding. Okay, they weren't part of the Constitution in 1776, the post offices, but these media corporations were started later on and have kind of glommed themselves on and declared themselves like part of the establishment, and they are not. And the last point, and I'll just give you guys the floor after this, but we didn't go and say, oh, BlackBerry do better, Blockbuster do better, Barnes and Noble do better. We just replaced them, disrupted them with better technological versions. And so the idea that, New York Times do better, that's completely outmoded way of thinking about it. We need to disrupt, we need to replace, we need to build better things. We need to have things that have on-chain fact checking, that have voices from overseas, that have voices that are actually experts in their own fields, that have voices that are not necessarily corrupted by these
Explain what you mean by
motives.
On-chain fact checking. Give an example.
Okay, so this is a very deep area, but fundamentally, the breakthrough of Bitcoin was that an Israeli and a Palestinian, or a Democrat and a Republican, or a Japanese person and a Chinese person all agree on who has what Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain. it is essentially a way of, in a low trust environment, but a high computation environment, you can use computation to establish mutually agreed upon facts. And these facts are who owns what million or billion of the roughly $1 trillion on the Bitcoin blockchain. And that's a kind of thing people will fight over a $10,000 shed. When you can establish global truth over a byte, which says, do you have 20 or 5 or 10 BTC? You can actually generalize that to establish global truth on any other financial instrument. And that's tokens, and that's, loans and derivatives. And that's a huge part of the economy. And then you can generalize it further to establish other kinds of assertions. And that gets a little bit further afield, but not just, proof of work and proof of stake, but things like proof of location or proof of identity. There's various other facts you can put on there. So you start actually accumulating what I think of as not the paper of record, but the ledger of record, a ledger of all of these facts that some of them are written by so-called crypto oracles, some of them arise out of smart contracts, but this is what you refer to. And as a today model of what that looks like, it's sort of like how when someone links a tweet to prove that something happened, people link an on-chain record to prove that something happened. Concrete example. Do you guys remember when Vitalik Buterin made that large donation earlier this year?
Yes.
Okay. So Chamath, you're nodding. You want to talk about that? Explain how it happened?
I think that you basically tweeted out something that was essentially trying to raise money to secure necessary equipment and pharmaceutical supplies to India during a pretty bad COVID outbreak. And then I think you decided that you were going to donate some money, and then Vitalik basically stepped up and actually gave quite a large sum. I'm not exactly sure the exact number, Balaji.
Yeah, so it was an enormous amount in illiquid terms of this meme coin, these Shibu coins. But the thing is that everybody, when they wanted to prove that this has happened because it was so unbelievable, such a large amount of money, he was marked at on the order of $1 billion when he gave it. Do you know how they proved it? They didn't link a tweet. They linked a block explorer, okay, like an on-chain record that showed that this debit and this credit had happened. And the big thing about this is, we take for granted, when you link a tweet, you're taking for granted that Twitter hasn't monkeyed with it. But guess what? Twitter monkeys with a lot of tweets these days. A lot of people get disappeared. And so it's not actually that good a record of what happened anymore. This is deleted. This guy got suspended. This, even the Trump stuff, forget about like Trump himself, but that historical archive of what happened, you can't link it anymore. It's link rotted. Just from that, I know it's one of the 1,000th most important things about it, but it's an important thing.
In the example of, say, Taiwan and China believing Taiwan is part of the one China concept, and Taiwan believes it is a country, and everybody in the world has a different vote on that. How does the blockchain clarify what is the fact about, is China a country or is it a province?
Very good question.
Doesn't have to.
What it does is it clarifies the facts about the metadata. Who asserted that it was a country and who asserted that it was a province, and what time did they do so? And what money, how much BTC did they put behind that or what have you? So it doesn't give you everything. But it does start to give you unambiguous proof of who and proof of when and proof of what. And then from that, at least,
Yeah, I mean, the way I've kind of explained it to family members who've asked, because the concept of a chain is difficult, I think, for people that aren't don't have a background in computer science to really grok. It's but everyone understands the concept of a database. There's a bunch of data in there, except in this case, the data that makes up the database is what's being verified by everyone, and it's distributed, so everyone has a copy of it.
I want to know what you guys think about this week in the Facebook dumpster fire. Let's move to something splashy. And
can I just say one thing? There's a book, Friedberg, on what you just mentioned, which is called The Truth Machine by Casey and Vigna, and it gives a pop culture explanation of the ledger of record type concepts I just mentioned.
Which I don't think a lot of people grok yet, Balaji, to your point, and I think we're skipping past it, but it's a really important point, which is historically databases have sat on someone's servers. And whoever has those servers decides what data goes in the database and how they're edited and what's allowed to come out of the database. So in this notion, generally a database with information in it can be held by lots of people who generally as a group kind of vote and decide what's going to go into it. And that's the power of decentralization and how it changes, the information economy, which drives the world. And it's going to have a lot of implications, right?